Hello, I'm Linor Moudou. Welcome to Africa 54. Here is what's coming up. Kenyan riot police clash with protesters in Nairobi as demonstrators nationwide demand President William Ruto's resignation. A Frenchman living in Senegal gains internet fame for his Wolof language learning videos. The Democratic Republic of Congo approves the emergency use of 2 Mpox vaccines in an effort to contain an outbreak in South Kivu. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our newscast in East Africa, where anti-tax demonstrators and police are clashing on Tuesday in Kenya. Riot police fired tear gas at protesters in Nairobi, and demonstrations erupted in other cities across the country. Protesters are demanding the resignation of President William Ruto following a week of deadly clashes. Tear gas clouds drifted over downtown Nairobi after demonstrators ignited fires on the main road running through the center of the capital. Protesters also threw stones at police in the central business district outside of Nairobi. Hundreds of demonstrators marched through Mombasa, Kenya's second largest city on the Indian Ocean coast, chanting, "Ruto must go." Ruto is facing the most serious crisis of his nearly 2-year-old presidency. He appears to be trapped between the demands of lenders such as the International Monetary Fund to cut deficits and an angry population struggling from the rising cost of living. There is a heavy police presence in Nairobi as riot police patrol the streets. The protests started as an online outpouring of anger over nearly $2.7 billion of tax hikes in a proposed finance bill and have grown into a nationwide movement against corruption and misguided governance. VOA's Paul Ndio spoke to James Gundi, an adjunct professor of African Studies at Georgetown University, for more perspective on the situation in Kenya.
Not unexpected. I think this is something that probably we could have anticipated. I think it's something that has been cooking for a long time. We are dealing with a generation that asks questions and does not do that because I said so. I think the powers that be would love to believe it's the finance bill and the finance bill only. Because if it were the finance bill, then that's an easy problem to solve. All you need to do is make amendments or even withdraw, as they have done. But the problem is it's not just the finance bill. It's a lot of things that young people, I would say all of us have seen, but I think young people are being impacted more. They are at the stage where they are starting life. They are not being given hope. They are not seeing hope. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. They can't even see a tunnel. The finance bill became the vehicle that the young generation, the Gen Z, used as a front. Really, it's just the starting point. I think there are a lot of issues that Ruto has to address.
There are a lot of people who have said that when he was campaigning, he was largely focused on issues related to what the young people are dealing with. In fact, he came up with a phrase commonly known as the hustler president, right? All these people, young people, looked up to him as somebody who was going to give them some hope, open up the government, give them jobs, create internships here and there, and do all sorts of things.
He may not necessarily have understood the young people that he was promising. And that's because all his political career, he has fought a certain kind of an adversary that he could promise And if he doesn't deliver and the adversary goes against him, he knew how to handle that adversary. So he already had some tactics of dealing with his political adversaries. He's faced with a completely different adversary. And I think he's a little bit frustrated, and you can see the frustration and anger when he speaks. He's a little bit frustrated because he doesn't have the tools and the weaponry to fight the new enemy. And that must be making him really, really angry and frustrated.
James Gundi is an adjunct professor of African Studies at Georgetown University. U.S. Congressman Dan Kildee represents the 8th District in the state of Michigan. He recently concluded a tour of Africa as part of a congressional delegation. VOA's Yeheyes Wahib spoke with him while he was in the Gambia. Kildee says the primary purpose of the trip was to reauthorize the African Growth and Opportunity Act, also known as AGOA.
This is my third trip to the continent, but it's really the first one that is specifically focused on our desire to reauthorize the African Growth and Opportunities Act. You know, it's the framework for U.S. trade with the developing nations on the continent. It expires at the end of the year, and we want to continue and improve the relationship. That's the technical purpose. But for me, this is really all about the U.S. well overdue taking a much more significant role on the continent of Africa, exercising more leadership, engaging in trade, being much more present than the United States has been. And I'm a very big advocate of that. AGOA is one mechanism for us to do so. But it's really, for me personally, as a member of Congress, a larger purpose. The U.S. must play a more significant role, must have a more significant presence on the continent.
The African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, that's what you're talking about, has been the core of the United States economic policy and commercial engagement with Africa. And I believe about, 32 African countries are eligible for AGOA benefits in 2024. What is the plan? To keep those who are and get new ones?
Obviously to remain engaged with the current AGOA countries, but also to create incentives and motivation for perhaps broader engagement across the continent. But it even goes further than that. For those currently AGOA eligible countries, we want to do a couple of things. One, substantially enhance the trade relationship. And we're on this particular trip, we're visiting 4 countries: Cape Verde, Kenya, Tanzania, and the Gambia. Each of them with dramatically different economies and significantly different levels of engagement, but for each of them, an upside. So for us, it's increasing and modernizing AGOA to deal with the economy as it is right now, increasing trade. But for me, and this relates perhaps more specifically to Kenya, pursuing a true bilateral free trade agreement, a conventional free trade agreement. I think it's long overdue. Kenya, to me, represents the best opportunity because of the development of the economy there and the other aspects of the Kenyan economy and governance, that I think really begs for us to take this from an AGOA-type relationship to a free and fair, co-equal, bilateral trade relationship, but also, honestly, provides an alternative to some of the malign influences that have seen the African continent as something to engage in order to take advantage. In our case, I think the the lack of U.S. presence has left that door open. Trade, our soft power, our relationships, the fact that we can engage in a much broader level, I think not only is good for both countries, the U.S. and the African nations that we trade with, but provides an alternative to interests whose long-term interests are not so much in the interests of the people of Africa, but more about their own self-interests.
That was U.S. Congressman Dan Kildee, who represents the 8th District in the state of Michigan. Former South Carolina governor and U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, continues to draw support from Republican voters long after she dropped out of this year's U.S. presidential race. VOA's Dora McCoy looks at how Haley supporters may help determine the winner of the election between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump.
Nearly 3 months after suspending her campaign for president, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley announced that she would vote for former President Donald Trump in November.
Biden has been a catastrophe. So I will be voting for Trump.
But her supporters are not necessarily following her lead. A March 2024 Emerson College poll found that Haley voters were almost twice as likely to say they would vote for President Joe Biden over Trump. Other exit polls suggest at least half of Haley voters won't vote for Trump.
I was sad to hear that Nikki did not get enough votes to stay in the race. However, I'm not a fan of President Trump. I feel very concerned about the Republican Party.
I would not really have what I consider to be a viable option in a Trump versus Biden election. I really don't want to see either one of them in the White House next year.
You know, I'm not happy with either. I mean, I did support Trump, and I would probably still lean that way.
Haley says Trump should court her voters.
Trump would be smart to reach out to the millions of people who voted for me and continue to support me, and not assume that they're just going to be with him.
Haley supporters have the potential to swing this presidential election. During April's Pennsylvania primary, Haley earned up to 1/4 of Republican votes in wealthier suburbs, even though she dropped out of the race weeks earlier. Analysis of the 2020 presidential election suggests success with suburban voters tipped the scales in Biden's favor. Haley pulled in big numbers in swing states, including Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, and Wisconsin.
You saw a lot of upscale, well-educated, well-off Republican voters trending toward Nikki Haley, and I think that included some of those independents as well. I could see some of them becoming swing voters in the general election.
How do you bring these Nikki Haley voters back into the tent?
I'm not sure we need too many.
The Biden campaign is actively pursuing Haley supporters with ads like this, which showcase Trump bashing Haley, who he appointed UN ambassador. It's part of a wider Biden strategy to attract anti-Trump Republicans.
She's gone crazy. She's a very angry person.
So far, Trump's problem is going to be consolidating the Haley vote. I don't know if you call it a Republican vote, but he has to get a large majority of the Haley vote.
There has been no sustained public drive by the Trump campaign to attract voters who chose Haley in the Republican Party primaries, even though in a tight race, those supporters might make the difference on Election Day. Dora McCoy, VOA News, Washington.
Now, in our series dedicated to the international diaspora, we are featuring Ludovic Baron, a 27-year-old Frenchman who settled in Senegal just over a year ago and has mastered the Wolof language to the point where his Wolof learning videos are going viral on the internet. Alison Fernandez has the story.
Ludovic Baron, a 27-year-old Frenchman, has only been living in Senegal for a year, but he speaks Wolof fluently.
Hello, how are you? Is everything okay? Do you have curdled milk?
Ludovic's neighbors in the Wakam district of Dakar are pleasantly surprised, like this seller of curd milk.
It is surprising to see a Frenchman speak Wolof fluently because most people who come from France here only speak French. He worked really hard to learn quickly. If he left France to come here, it's because he's interested in our language.
It helps with your adaptation. It helps you negotiate prices too, to discover the people, their culture, have good times. If I only spoke French, I couldn't meet people in the same way.
De la même manière, en fait.
In Senegal, 80% of the population, the vast majority, speaks Wolof. Ludovic Baron recognized that the Senegalese people were excited to see a Frenchman speak fluently to them in their language, and so acquiring proficiency in Wolof would facilitate building relationships and effective communication with them. But he did not find enough online resources to learn Wolof. So Ludovic decided to launch his own YouTube channel, Apprendre le Wolof. Now he makes short, humorous videos, always with 2 subtitles, like this one made during the last Africa Cup of Nations. Today, on the roof of his house, he's recording a video with his friend, Babacar Ndao, a student and Wolof language enthusiast. Today's theme, colors.
Connaissez-vous le nom des couleurs en Wolof? Noir. Ñuul. Beige. Xall. Ok, merci Babacar. Jërëjëf.
What we try to do is allow Senegalese people to speak pure Wolof. For example, a person from Dakar might speak a sentence with an Arabic word, an English word, and a Wolof word. We do research. We try to bring what is profound and allow people from Dakar to take ownership of it.
The videos are very popular and widely shared in different countries around the world, notably in France, where they are followed by many French people of Senegalese origin.
I often get this feedback, the fact that seeing a white person who can speak Wolof, at first they feel a bit of embarrassment. They say to themselves, he knows my parents' language while I don't. But then after the shame comes the motivation. They say to themselves that if someone has done it from scratch, I can do it too.
Est-ce que vous connaissez ces mots en Wolof? Le marché. Diaba. La voiture. Damarbi. Les toilettes.
Between TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram platforms, Ludovic already has more than 600,000 followers on his Apprendre le Wolof account, and the number keeps growing. Alison Fernandez, VOA News, Dakar.
L'élève.
We are excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come in our health report, foul-smelling fumes from waste is affecting the health of Kenyan students, and they are doing something about it. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, as Kenya's youth threaten to continue protesting, what is next for President William Ruto? Will he stand by his pledge to not pass the bill to increase taxes? And will he meet with the youth who are calling for him to step down? Join me, Vincent Makori, on the next edition of Straight Talk Africa as we take a closer look at the Kenyan president and how he navigates the political landscape of one of East Africa's most democratically stable countries and economically developed nations that appears to be crumbling.
Their mental health. On this week's edition of Our Voices, we will explore how mental health is discussed in the media and why female journalists are at a higher risk. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, Mauritania's incumbent president Mohamed Ould Sheikh El Ghazouani, 67, has won re-election as leader of the desert nation. The Independent National Electoral Commission says the former army chief won just over 56% of the vote, giving him a second 5-year term. Eritrean rider Binyam Girmay is the first black rider to win a Tour de France stage in the last leg in Italy. Girmay says his sprint win is for all Africans. Before the podium celebration, Girmay greeted Eritrean fans, waving their country's green, red, and blue flag. And the UN Weather Agency says it has confirmed that Tropical Cyclone Freddy, a deadly Indian Ocean storm that lashed eastern Africa last year, was the longest-lasting cyclone ever recorded at 36 days. Cyclone Freddy topped the previous record held by Hurricane John, which struck Hawaii and lasted nearly 30 days in the northern Pacific 30 years ago. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo are approving the use of 2 Mpox vaccines in an effort to tackle an upsurge in monkeypox infections and to help quell a dangerous new strain spreading across the country. The regulator is issuing an emergency use authorization for both Bavarian Nordic's Bavacos shot, Jynneos, and LC16 made by KM Biologics. Both tools were widely available in Europe and the United States during the global outbreak in 2022. Congo has endured 20,000 cases and more than 1,000 deaths from Mpox, primarily among children, since the start of last year, according to Congo government data. The World Health Organization and many scientists warn of a new, more deadly strain of Mpox spreading in Congo's South Kivu province. The 2023 World Air Quality Report by IQ Air reveals that only 7 out of 134 reporting countries met safe air pollution levels in 2023, including Iceland, Mauritius, and New Zealand. In Kenya, students at a school next door to the country's largest dump site are planting bamboo to improve the air quality. Foul-smelling fumes from the waste is affecting the students' health. And now they are doing something about it. VOA's Grace Onyebu has more.
Armed with gardening hoes and bamboo seedlings, students gather at their school tree planting site. They're full of hope that trees they grow will filter the filthy air around the school. More than 100 bamboo trees dot the mini forest created around the Dandura Secondary School, located east of Kenya's capital, Nairobi, next to the country's largest dump site.
Some of the challenges that really affect us is the smell coming out from the dump site, the smoke. Burning of those elements in there really produces smokes that also triggers asthma. Asthma is a disease that it's commonly known in Dandura Secondary School.
Acrid smoke billows from the burning of refuse every morning, floating its way over to the neighboring school. This bamboo project is the school's way of fighting back.
My motivation of initiating bamboo project in the school was to mitigate the effects of dump site. It really pollute the air that we breathe, and with that I know it is going to reduce the cases of respiratory infections amongst the people in the Dandura community.
Dandura dump site occupies approximately 50 hectares of land and receives more than 2,000 tons of waste daily from around Nairobi, where 4 million people live. The dump site effects can be detected from kilometers away. Observers say Nairobi's air is often polluted by emissions from second-hand cars, and other pollutants include smoke from industries that are often located near residential areas. Adriana Mbandi is the Africa Regional Air Quality Expert at the United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP.
The impacts of air pollution to all parts of our bodies, including our brains, our organs, including our lungs, actually impact on even children before they are born, young children. It is really the best way to ensure that you do not breathe polluted air is to minimize your exposure.
Bamboo trees are hailed as one of nature's finest air purifier, according to UNESCO. The seedlings planted in August last year are slowly towering high against the suffocating fumes.
Now, planting bamboo trees ensures that there is a barrier that is provided in terms of the air that is polluted coming through, especially when you look at the fine particles. As well as, of course, the bamboo being a plant ensures that there is photosynthesis, and in photosynthesis ensures that it's producing oxygen, whereas also intaking carbon dioxide.
The WHO says air pollution kills about 7 million people in the world, and 99% of the global population were exposed to contaminated air in 2019.
VOA's Grace Oyenubi with that report. Lisa Frost Ramsey is an air quality specialist at SLR Consulting and associate professor at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She talks about the impact of air pollution on our health and steps to improve Africa's health quality.
Probably the best way to define bad air quality or poor air quality would be to look at the concentration of toxic air pollutants in the air. These can include particulates, so solid particles, and gaseous compounds, air pollution as well. Air pollution has very high impact on health. In fact, there's higher death rates related to air pollution than HIV and malaria combined. The most vulnerable are children and the elderly. The elderly because their systems are starting to degenerate and they cannot process toxins as well as young people. And children because their respiratory rates are very high. They breathe faster and more often than adults. And their bodies are small, so for the amount of toxins that they absorb, there's a greater effect. So children are very sensitive. Some of the key options would include developing a pollution control law, which is very necessary. And in some countries we have law, but it's very poorly implemented. We need to establish what pollution people are being exposed to. So getting some monitoring networks. There's wonderful technologies coming out of India, for example, that are low-cost sensors that you can put out. You can measure air pollution and you know what people then are being exposed to. You can't address a problem if you don't understand the problem first. Sometimes we're fortunate and you can see the air pollution. So, for example, with smoke and very dusty sources like in mining areas, you can actually see the hazy or the dustiness in the air and you know that you're being exposed. But some of the most toxic pollutants you can't see, and many of them you can't even smell, unfortunately. Also, it's quite difficult to say that if you're sneezing a lot, it's definitely air pollution because it could also be an allergy. So when we're trying to link air pollution to health impact, we not only look at symptoms, such as sneezing or coughing or feeling nauseous or having headaches, we link that with exposure, which would be